David gets here?
Sure, we have a quorum.
That's what I thought. All right, so are we recording something? Did that work out or not work out?
No, it's still recording pending, so it's all on Amy.
All right.
I am trying to troubleshoot it, but I may not be successful. Just FYI.
So when I'm in the town planning commission meetings, there's this whole long preamble that gets read at the beginning of each meeting that indicates that we're holding it remotely under authorization from the governor and so on and so forth. Is that something you have, Robin, that we can just read or what?
No.
No. Nick, you can put your hand down unless you have something else to say. I'll try and be the moderator. Thanks. I'll try and moderate this to some extent. But I will call the meeting to order at 6:10. I don't have an agenda in front of me, but I happen to know that the first order of business is to hear from members of the audience that may have something to say that's not on the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to say anything at this time? Nick, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be able to get on finally. The joys of technology. I think the village should go to Zoom meetings. They seem to be relatively flawless. But I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I walk quite a bit in the village, and it pertains to the land development code and looking at setbacks of various buildings. And I actually went out and sort of measured things today, looking at what was and often cited of kind of a nice landscape was the streetscape of Railroad Avenue in terms of the width of the sidewalks and the trees planted on it. And then, seeing the Maple Street project going up now, which is only 12 feet from the face of the building to the curb. And then the new Park Street building under construction is about 18 feet. And then 4 Pearl has got 28 feet. And I'm talking about these distances more in the fact that what can be done in that streetscape as you widen it a little bit more. And it also is in relation to what is happening with traffic. The Brownell Block and Railroad Avenue have parking alongside. It's a narrower sidewalk, but it seems a little bit more inviting than some of these sidewalks directly off of Maple and Park Street. And there really aren't many opportunities to try and bring in pedestrian amenities in these locations. So I hope as you start reviewing the code, you will take a look at that and understand. Now I'm going to wear a tree hat for a little bit as our tree committee tries to wrestle with helping in the downtown area, the limitations that are upon us. And the other one I wanted to kind of bring up was the new building next to the dollar store. And again, a setback issue that's in the transit design area. And I thought there was Andy was proposing a restaurant hotel connected as kind of a master application. But I never saw anything, any approval process for this particular building that is going up. And I also noticed, I believe that in front of the building, we have essentially a stormwater pond, sometimes lovingly called rain gardens. But I really think that that's not an appropriate place along the streetscape to have a rain garden of some sort. Unfortunately, many of the rain gardens that I've seen essentially just get to be weed patches. So I hope that in the future we look at that, and if he needs to deal with stormwater on the site, it should be done behind the building and not something that we're going to be seeing and alone driving Pearl Street, as well as individuals wanting to go to that store. So those are just some of my comments, and a lot of them come too from the Design 5 Corners and the charrettes that we did back then, and what individuals felt rose to the top for a redesigned 5 Corners. And certainly walkability, pedestrian amenities, some separation from the busy roadways are all things that lend itself to a really vibrant downtown. So that's my 2 bits. That's it.
Thank you, Nick. That was a fairly scant mention of the tree action from you, which is rare, but I appreciate the rest of your comments. As you know, there are many ways to treat the streetscape in a increasingly, village center, downtown, urbanized location. And we're dealing with the codes as we have them, which I think at the moment probably almost require this tight to the curb setback in the village center. It's not uncommon, but it's not that well, it isn't something that we've seen here because of the design pressure over the last 100 years. Just hasn't created that situation in Essex Junction. So I think it's probably appropriate to examine our regs and make sure they're doing what we want them to do based on what is getting developed. But the buildings that you're seeing show up are a direct result of regional and local, urban. I say urban, and it's hard to really say that Essex Junction is urban, but at least the 5 Corners area acts more urban than other parts of the village. So those pieces are following fairly well-tested design guidelines for these types of things. And, it is up to us to review them every couple of years and say, is this really what we wanted? Are we getting what we wanted? Do we have the right mix of pedestrian activity and, opportunity for amenities? And so I'll let Robin continue, but if he wants to, but 4 Pearl is an extraordinary opportunity that was allowed us to actually get more street, space than normal. What you're seeing on where the sewing machine store was on Maple and what you're seeing further down Pearl Park, is more in keeping with what's actually in our regulations. So if we want to modify those things, we're going to have to, now's the time. We're looking at the land development code, and we need to get into that. So thank you very much. That's great. Anybody else have comments that are not related to what's on the agenda? None. Okay. So that brings us into additions or amendments to the agenda. Robin, anything?
No, nothing.
Thank you. Minutes from our March 18th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those? Anybody?
I was not present at the meeting, so I don't know if I should. I was planning to not vote on them.
Yeah, well, we can. The way it works normally in these things is you are allowed to meet. You are allowed to vote on them. You can choose to abstain if you want, but you are allowed to meet vote on them, and you're certainly allowed to motion to approve them. And after we get it motioned and seconded, then we're going to talk about any changes.
Sure.
So this isn't like we're ready to approve them just yet. So would you like to make a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to open that up.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
Awesome. Is there any discussion and or corrections?
I didn't see any corrections that needed to be made.
Thank you. Diane, anything from your end? Do you usually find at least the typos?
I did not see any typos this time, but it overall looked like it was accurate. I did not check for people's names to see if they were spelled correctly.
Yep.
And the gentleman that's identified as speaking as being Redmond, he didn't really identify himself, but I'm sure that Amy got him, so I'll trust her.
Or it could have been Rootman.
Yeah, it's a root of father and son. I think it was the father that spoke the most. Is that fair?
Yeah, so it'd be Dr. Rootman.
And his name, I believe, is Jeff.
Yes.
Any other comments on the agenda? Or sorry, on the minutes? All right, all in favor of the minutes with any corrections related to identifying Dr. Jeff Rubin. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Minutes are approved. Thank you. On to the work session. We're continuing with our land development code review. The docket tonight is design 5 corners and any design review amendments. Who is starting off tonight, Robin?
I have a presentation if you want me to share it.
Sounds good. And I'll give an update on a major component of the design 5 corners. After you've made your presentation, Regina.
Okay, you might want to chime in at any appropriate spot. Okay, let me see. What are you guys seeing? Are you seeing like?
We see it, but it's small. Can you screen it or something?
How about that? Okay, awesome. All right. So what we're going to go through tonight is just so on your agenda you have Village Center District Design 5 Corners and the design review stuff. I'm just sort of thinking about those collectively all as one, because I'm not sure it makes too much sense to think about it two separately. So I've reviewed some stuff so far, and I kind of want to go through Design 5 Corners with you folks and my understanding of what's in the land development code right now and what you actually want to see different in order to meet that vision. Then I've got some clarifying questions that will help me understand what process most of these new developments are using to come through the Planning Commission. And then just want to bring some attention to the 2019 comprehensive plan and some of the specific objectives that were written in there about some potential land development code changes. So I only have 12 slides, just so you know. And some of this is just for us to discuss on certain ones. So just a reminder for folks, this is one of the images from Julie Campoli in the final Design 5 Corners study. And really the study calls for maximizing space in the village core, calming traffic, and reclaiming more space for people.
Can we stop you when we want to?
You can stop me whenever you want. I just can't see you or anything, so you have to holler out like that.
Yeah. All right, good. So the hand raising won't work either, probably.
Yeah, I can't see anything.
I'll try and keep an eye on that because I can see the hand raising. So if you want to say something, raise your hand, everybody. So just for our own reference, and you may not know the answer to this, but we get a lot of questions, especially recently as people start to see these buildings going up on setback from the street. Now, I'm guessing what I'm looking at there is about 12 feet. And it might be 14 and it might be something, but it isn't a lot more than 12 feet. And what I'm seeing is maybe 2 feet of some strip, and then I'm seeing maybe 8 feet of a sidewalk, and then I'm seeing maybe 3 feet of, okay, now I'm up to the building. But just so people are aware of what gets called out as not enough space between the building and the street, we want to start talking about this in serious, terms, foot by inch, because it's part of our design vocabulary, and it's very important for our pedestrian and our village experience. What that use is between the building face and the curb. So I don't know that you know the answer to this, but I just want people to see, based on examples that we are being given of, here's what we want. This one from Julie Campoli, that 12 feet is not a bad number. We just need to understand what we're doing with it.
Yeah, great point, John. I don't know what that distance is. It's not, that level of detail is not in the report as far as I know. But yeah, excellent point. And eventually I do have a question about what you actually want to do with setbacks. So this will be helpful.
Yeah. Like, I see room in there for street lights and trees, and, there's some bike parking there out with the cars, and, so we've stolen the parking away from the Five Corner area because we don't want to give, we have too many cars trying to go through there. We could put it back in. We have the space for a row of parking. The problem is it would be, make the traffic almost worse because you'd be squeezing it down again. So, we have to deal with some things with the vehicle side of Five Corners that we may not like, but let's be mindful of where and when we can change that, which happens farther down Park Street and farther out the arteries as you get away from Five Corners. So remember how special Five Corners is as you're going through the slideshow, and that's not for you, Regina, that's for the audience here.
Yeah. Okay. So this is another one of the visuals from Julie Campoli in the background there. And from the report itself, several popular design elements were identified. So central green spaces and pocket parks, buildings lining the streets, pedestrianized Main Street, multi-story mixed-use buildings, and additional street trees. I put in red text here what you have control over in the Land Development Code. Some of these things, some of the big pieces of Design Five Corners, are certainly not something that is going to be addressed in the Land Development Code. It's going to be implemented in other ways. Robin, I didn't know if that was a good point for you to mention, what you maybe wanted to mention.
Yeah, it is a good point. And you can see, even though these are just conceptual Lego blocks really in the image you're looking at, the buildings going up are not too different from what you're looking at.
All right. But this is a question I have, and I think and John, you just sort of alluded to some of this a little bit too. So let's just talk about this. So when each of these buildings are coming up, let's say if this building comes forward someday, or the owner of this building comes forward one day, who is responsible for putting in the amenities in front of the building? Street trees, all that kind of stuff. Is the village ultimately one day going to do streetscape work, or is each individual responsible for that?
We have asked, for instance, the Fort Pearl Street building, we pushed him back 15 feet from his property line, and we asked him to put in the trees. We also asked him to put in silver-cells, and he did it on his own property, where the trees are not actually village property, it's his property.
Okay.
And that had a lot of implications that we weren't thinking that much about at the time. It's an L-shaped building. You take that much off his property on Pearl Street and Park Street, then he loses 15 feet on the end of each building. That has an impact on the cost of construction and what sort of return he's going to get. So the same person's also doing the 11 Park Street building. We pushed him back from the front door. The idea was that as you're walking up, and Park Street's the one that we can work with at the minute, as you're walking up Park Street from the tracks into the village centre, the space widens for you, like the village has opened its arms to you. The one that didn't go forward, the old Domino's building just to the right of the entrance to Park Street School, we'd asked them for 8 to 10 feet of their land, which they didn't have to give us, but they said they would. The other side of the street, the building was approved, won't go in for a while as part of Chittenden crossings. They said they really needed the space above the sidewalk for apartments, but they would give us an arcade. So when you're walking, the building would be set back from the street at the entry level, which would essentially widen the sidewalk and also enable you to walk, at least for the length of the building, in a dry space if it was raining rather than a wet space. So that's negotiation. That's not in the land development code.
Okay. All right. Okay. So my read on it is this is what your land development code includes. I could have missed things or misinterpreted, so feel free to let me know if this is not right from your perspective. But in the village district, minimum of 2 stories, maximum of 4 stories. No setbacks, but I did see that there's room in there for you folks to basically negotiate what you've just described, Robin. There's no set residential density, no specific minimum parking requirements. The location of the parking has to either be to the side, rear, or underneath the building. Historic building protections. And then I'm calling this soft standards, but that's not a technical term by any means, but essentially there's a lot of the standards in the district are described as essentially trying to mimic and respect the existing historic character rather than saying, very specifically brick facade, a gazillions of different things that you can put in there. So I guess I kind of want to just stop here before I go to the other piece of this slide and have a discussion. So we've talked about the setback thing a little bit. It sounds like we would potentially want to get a little bit more specific on the setback.
This is John. I have just 2 comments. One is your overall take on this is exactly right, and especially with respect to the soft standards. There's a danger to prescribing too much, and I think we're trying to avoid doing that. But we do have a number of historic properties that we would like to respect. So the way that happens is intentionally trying to give the planning commission a little bit of leeway rather than force them to follow some, Secretary of the Interior guidelines or something like that. Yeah. And I just wanted to get back onto that setback thing. So when it says no setbacks, that doesn't mean you get to build it right to the curb. That there's got to be some number there, and I don't know what that is, Robin. I don't know how we.
Well, it's about talking about your property line. You can build up to the edge of your property line. I mean.
Yeah, it's a 0 setback for each. Yeah. It's front, side, and rear, I think, too, all
Yeah.
0 setbacks.
I mean, one of the motifs we talked about was the buildings, you know, on that short section of Main Street, you know, the Brownell Block and so on. That was, you know, urban, and, you know, as far as Vermont's going, you know, Essex Junction, Winooski, Burlington, they're more urban than most other places. And so we were looking at the Brownell Block and the block across the street. And if you look what's going up, whether it's 4 Pearl Street, 11 Park Street, or 3 Maple Street, they have at least that distance from the building front to the curb or more.
And, you know, Burlington says that too. They say, you know, 0 setback, but what that means is that it's written into their planning ordinance that it has to be at least 12 feet, but it can't be more than that when you talk about some of their downtown spaces. So they say no setbacks, but what they really mean is it's 12 feet.
Right, and you know, we got to remember, you know, these are all individual applications that are part of a much larger jigsaw puzzle. And you know, the connector road closing off Main Street, the space in front of the Firebird Cafe, they're all spaces, and they're all spaces that are linked by sidewalks. If it goes up Main Street, you could actually get from Railroad Avenue to the Firebird Cafe without crossing the street. And then you cross Maple and you can get the whole way down to the connector road. And the intersection of, you know, call it 4 corners, food corners, whatever you want to call it, the intersection there is much narrower. It's, if you have something going on at Memorial Park, instead of having traffic passing on the 3 sides of the park, you have traffic passing on one side of the park, and it opens up that sort of space, short space north of Memorial Park to the TD Bank. Have something happen there. It's a huge change.
What you're saying is that we have these rules in place, but then we also have opportunities where the rules get broken to provide some kind of relief and some kind of a amenity space, green or gallery or art or pocket park or whatever.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, when Peter Welsh visited, I sort of, off the top of my head, I coined the term putting the village back in Essex Junction. And that's exactly what we're doing. It's an urban village, you know, like Manhattan or anywhere else, but we're still putting the village back in Essex Junction.
Diane, you have your hand up, and then Phil, I see that right after Diane.
Okay, so I think that at this point in time, I think we should actually put that 12-foot space in the village center as an expectation and not have the 0 lot line on the front of the building anymore. Because our community has been letting us know that they want some green in front of these buildings. And the only way we're going to get green in front of buildings is to have space for green in front of the buildings. I think that might, if we went to the plan itself, I think we might see that we do talk about green space. And I think we need to go that extra step now that we're rewriting this. And yes, so far we've been successful at having the negotiations, but that doesn't necessarily mean we will always be successful at getting those negotiations. So why not be right out there and say that we want some space in front of the fronts of the buildings, so that it is pedestrian friendly. I mean, right now, as I'm looking at the building on Maple Street that's going up, I could have sworn we had asked for a little bit of sidewalk space there. And I'm seeing a lot less sidewalk space than what I envisioned. But, you know, I'd have to go to the plans as to what we approved and what's now being done. It's a little late, I think, because they pretty much set the footings for that building. So maybe we can get some amenities, you know, as opposed to getting some more green in front of that building. And that's Phil's turn.
Well, green, let me just comment that green in front of the building and, you know, grass are not the same thing, right? So
I'm not looking for grass. In fact, grass is the last thing I want to see there, okay, yeah. To be perfectly honest.
Phil.
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to make sure I understand what's going on, as this is my first time dealing with rewriting the code. So as I understand it, right now in the village center, which is what we're talking about with Design Five Corners, we have design review. Is that correct?
Yep.
And in that design review, we don't have a codified setback rule. It's pretty much up to the commission to decide if the design fits our needs. Is that right? And
Well, I think, and going back a bit, sorry, Phil, going back a bit what John said. There's small lots in the village center district. If you say a certain percentage of the front of this lot shall be, open to the sidewalk, you basically blight that lot. I think we need to have the flexibility. That's why sometimes I like the word may in terms of what the PC can do. John and I also, you'll hear us saying, we want to give designers the opportunity to blow our socks off, to come up with something that we could not have anticipated.
Yep.
And we're very happy about. Setting a rigid rule can sometimes backfire and get you the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm asking, is that if we do put into the code like that, this 12-foot setback, does that box us into only accepting designs that have at least a 12-foot setback?
Yeah. It's interesting. There may be, I'm not looking at a map, but if you consider the connector road, what's been approved for Chittenden Crossings and what's been approved for Park Street, and basically one of only 2 lots probably on Maple Street, we have, the setback that shows in Julie's photograph or more in almost every case.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, especially for folks that are new. So for the most part, and I don't know where this line falls, and it probably is different on every single one of these roads that we're talking about, but the village owns all of the road and probably a good amount of this public space here. So typically when we're talking about a building setback, it's how far the property owner can build their building from their own front property line, which
Correct.
is not way out here in the street, or you might really think about it as the curb. It's not there. It's probably way back here someplace. So the setback is kind of the difference between their front property line and where their building sits. It seems to me that what also happens given the good amount of flexibility in the land development code, is you've really got a lot of leeway to talk with the developer about what you want them to do with the rest of this space. Is that what's going on? Or in the majority of these circumstances, does the private property actually come out way further?
No.
I think you're right, Regina.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're right. You're 100% right, Regina. Generally, the village owns a foot behind the sidewalk on average throughout the village center.
Okay.
So
just to be clear, I'm in favor of flexibility for the commission, but with writing into it doesn't seem like the vision is written into the LDC right now. And so making the vision more clear of like what we kind of expect, I think, from developers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to be clear about telling them what the general vision is, and I know that can be done and still allow some exceptions, or allow them to say, okay, well, we will have some review authority to grant, maybe not a variance, but you can propose something different and we'll look at it, but here's what we expect.
I think the buildings are going in, 4 Pearl, 11 Park, what was approved for, I'm going to guess, the old Domino's building, what's been approved from Chittenden Crossing tells anybody who's coming in to develop in the village center what we're expecting. We're expecting to get frontage from their development. It's the new normal, so to speak.
And so far, the design 5 corners and the issues that we're talking about are really limited to the village center district right now, which has a defined area. It's not, all the way down every street that leads to 5 corners. It's it's got a fairly short contained area.
Yeah.
So do we want to keep talking about this? Regina, do you have more questions? Do you want to prompt us some more? Or do you want to get into like the design review amendments? Because one of the things that we've been talking about, and maybe you know this already, is that we would, especially based on certain buildings that have shown up recently, like to expand our design review, powers to a little bit more than the village center.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to get there, but let me just put what I have on the rest of this slide, and you guys can tell me you don't want any of it. All of these are questions.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think your system is working pretty well, and I don't want to try to fix something that isn't broken. So I don't know if you want any of this level of more standardization. But these are just the pieces that I was thinking about.
Yeah.
One that jumps out to me, Regina, is the reduced minimum lot width. If somebody buys a site that's less than 60 foot, they go to the zoning board, and in my time here, if it's not a problem that's been caused by the action of the owner or even a previous owner, the zoning board will approve the fact that they can move forward even though they don't have a 60-foot frontage.
So existing non-conforming lots are allowed to remain existing non-conforming lots.
Yeah, they just can't make them any more non-conforming.
Something in half and make smaller than 60 feet and get away with it. But if you happen to buy one that's already less than 60 feet, you get to keep using it.
Okay.
Yes.
And generally, is that fine? I mean, I assume that's fine. You don't have anybody, and nor would you want, I don't think, folks coming into the village center and, I don't know, doing something like a townhouse style where each could be 20 feet wide?
Probably not as a single thing, but if you have townhouses, often you turn them into row houses, and all of a sudden you've got 200 feet of the 20-foot wide buildings, which happens, and people love them, and it can be really beautiful. But I think that's not the goal of having multiple individual small parcels. It's trying to make sure we don't do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else on there that seems like it would be useful, or is most of this not necessary?
I like it all. And I use the word massing a lot. I always follow up with scale. I like it. I think it speaks to stuff that may be implicit in what we have, but we haven't called it out, like Phil said, and I think it's a great thing to do.
Okay, so maybe we can describe some of these things still with flexibility, but use some of this to really help kind of flesh out and give some more, I'll say specificity, but specificity with flexibility around what you're looking for when it comes to these sorts of things.
Yeah, what my opinion on this is, architectural elements and some of the other character-based things. I mean, the example that I would give you is that you have all these sort of, older, possibly historic or actually historic buildings, and Apple decides they're going to build a glass box in the middle of it, right? Do you want that? Do you have any way to prevent that? And what rules would you have that would say that's too different from what we already have and we're not interested, or which would be a protection type of mechanism, or would we say, well, if you want to do that, here's how you do it. So that's usually the kind of thing that happens. Are you trying to maintain the basic character of your village, or are you open to allowing things that are quite different to come in and mix with what you have now?
Yeah, and am I right in thinking that you folks are generally not open to something very, very different?
I'm. It may not be my personal feeling, but I think in general that's a very strong opinion throughout the village.
Yeah.
I think we should be open to looking, because, like I said before, who knows if somebody comes up with something and go, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but if the rules allow it, then somebody can come in and make it happen, and then you get into subjective decisions about whether that particular board feels, how they feel about some particular project, and that's
Right.
the part of this we're trying to minimize. We're trying to say, look, we told you what we wanted, and we want you to try and follow those rules, right? So. We gotta pick something and stick with it. Otherwise, we get what people can use the rules to make us accept.
Yep. Okay, great. That is helpful. Okay, then I just have 2 more question slides, and then actually, John, we're going to get into the zoning district boundaries stuff.
All right. Steve Shaw has a question. Can he? Okay. Can he answer? Can he ask?
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry. I can wait till the end. That's not a big deal.
Okay.
Okay. So this I was unclear on looking through the land development codes. So if somebody wants to do a multifamily building, what application type are they coming through for you folks? Can they just do a site plan, or are they required to do a subdivision or planned unit development?
Yeah, probably be PUD.
Okay. And how do folks generally feel about that? Do you think that's helpful? Is it necessary? Would a site plan be? I mean, in theory, you could do it just as a site plan. We could rewrite the land development codes, I should say, to be clear that it could just be a site plan.
A site plan, but since we have design review, I think they got to give us more than a site plan. But yeah. I think our rules are currently a little vague on the whole PUD thing, because many of the sections that allow a PUD, a project as a PUD in their district, start out with something like a project may be presented as a PUD, and so now we're stuck wondering, well, is it being presented as one? Does it need to be? Why would we do that and not have some kind of just a regular one? And I'd love to clear that up a little bit. Like in some cases it says anything over so many buildings has to be a PUD, but I think it's a little vague.
Okay.
Yeah, and part of the PUD thing with the design in PUD, which is design over design if it's in the village center district, we've often run into trouble with a smaller site and seeing if they meet the requirements of the PUD design. I think the requirements we have in PUD are better in places such as Autumn Pond, and I think that's proven to be true. If you've got a small lot in the village center and you come in and you want to meet the requirements of the village center district, and you're doing it through PUD rather than site plan, it's very difficult. But because we've also got design review in the village center, site plan would automatically come under design review. I think that's probably enough for the village center district. We're not giving anything up. We're just understanding the possible limitations of the size of some of the lots in the village center district and what's possible.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to me. And then same question, if it's a mixed-use building, is it still, for the most part, it's going to be a PUD, like if you have the commercial on the ground floor?
I don't know why it needs to be a PUD
it doesn't.
for any reason other than you're trying to, my understanding is it's a trade-off. You're saying, I'm going to give you something that breaks a couple of the rules, but in return, I'm going to give you something better. Mm-hmm. And that's been a little bit of a struggle for us in most of our PUD applications, is we really haven't been strong enough in telling them what the trade-offs are. Why are we doing this and what are we getting? Because otherwise, if you're not getting something better that gives you more of what you wanted in your vision, then there's no reason to grant anybody a PUD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and my overall opinion on this, for both of these questions, is that really, truly, it's just a site plan. A PUD, the way it's originally intended, is a form of subdivision, and none of these buildings are subdividing lots. It's basically one structure, and they're putting different types of uses, whether it's mixed use or all residential, within one structure. And there's really no reason to go down the rabbit hole of a planned unit development. And you can just be more clear in the land development code that the standards that you want to apply to these buildings in the village center need to meet all of the things that you're talking about, including design review. But all of that can be done under a site plan.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I agree too. I think we sort of broad brush approach when we put the PUD in. And I think in an area we've already got design review, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Okay, so we can take a look at that. Then uses. We've talked quite a bit about this over the last couple of working meetings, and I am not clear. So on the ground floors currently in the village center, is it required that you do commercial on the ground floor, or is there some flexibility there?
There really isn't. It's retail commercial in the entry level. We talked about this briefly, just looking at 4 Pearl Street. I think I've said this before. When you walk in, and what should be a semi-private space for the people who are living in the residential units, it's basically a public space. People are coming or going to the restaurant, to the bar, or inhabiting the same space as they are. And I got to looking when I went into urban areas, and it's not unusual if you have condominium or whatever that they have frontage on the street. And I think if McGillicuddy's and the apartment complex above it had separate entrances, if I was living in the apartments, I'd be much more comfortable. And it just makes sense. I think it's great, but I used this term before, and it was a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit suburban to say every entry level must be retail commercial. That's just not the way it happens in urban areas. The majority of them are retail commercial, but not all of them. And I think it makes for a better streetscape. It certainly makes for a better interior plan if you can give, even if it's the one building, but you give 20 feet for the entrance to the apartment complex, and on either side of it's retail commercial. I just think, John know better from me, but from architectural terms and the way you use the space, it's just so much better. I never thought about it before until the 4 Pearl Street building went up. John?
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the settings I've been in where you have a mix of commercial and residential on the ground floor can be very successful. And what that usually means is you're not talking about putting somebody's bedroom and living room on the first floor. You're talking about putting the collective lobby, mailroom, laundry, some part of the commercial, a more commercial part of the residential space happens on the first floor. Yeah. And it's more open to people, and it can be pretty nice, and it can be completely in keeping with the rest of the uses that are happening around it. while all the actual residential, space for families is probably not there.
Absolutely. And if I can sort of jump onto that a little bit, I think if buildings are in the village center district, but they're not on a street, I don't think we should require retail commercial in the entry level of a building that's behind a building that does have retail commercial in it. If people want to put it in, that's fine, but I don't think it should be a requirement.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What you're trying to do with the requirements for your first floor is address the major use that's part of the pedestrian experience, which is along the sidewalks and streets. So a second building back, unless it's some kind of a little, cute arcade that you have access to, like the one of the buildings that's happening across the street by in Old Flanders. It's designed to create a little space for mostly for its inhabitants, but I'm sure other people can walk through there. That's got a little more going on than just residential. And I think that's fine. You need to actually design some reason for folks to get off the main street, and we've all seen it, where there's a little opening and all of a sudden there's more shops and there's more activity and there's more stuff and people can wander back there. Mm-hmm. But you got to have a little something going on in order for that to be successful. It can't just be it has to be really activated somehow.
Yeah, you're right, John. I think, what you're talking about, people are creating a sense of mystery and delight and surprise. And I think that's a wonderful thing to have when you're walking down the street. It's very European, but when you see an opening, or, for an entry, as they call it back home, for cars to go through to people, and you sort of stick your head in, you look, and there's something there that encourages you to go a bit further, and all of a sudden you see something you didn't even know existed. I think that's a wonderful thing to do.
Okay. All right. So moving on to the comprehensive plan, and this one we're going to essentially get into the zoning districts. So here's one section of your comprehensive plan. There may be some benefit in extending the village center designation down Pearl Street. Areas adjacent to the village center have been in transition, a whole bunch of mix of different residential. And this is talking about a little bit of kind of the development pressure sort of bubbling out of the village center and going down those side streets, and at what point or how is there either a transition or a strong end to what you want to be more commercial, more village, maybe with some higher density residential, and then sort of preserve the existing neighborhoods as they are. And then these are kind of just the goals and the objectives that kind of came out from that section of the text. So similar kinds of things, just in terms of thinking through what should be done here in terms of the zoning districts and uses. So I can't tell, outside of the Pearl Street reference, Pearl Street reference, I can't tell what the thought is in terms of what zoning district changes might happen here, whether we're talking about expanding the village center or we're talking about doing some other changes with some of these mixed uses that come out of the village center in each direction. So what are you folks thinking?
This reminds me of something that's happened a few times. In the village center district, in the land development code, it says you have, I'm going to just put a number in there, you have to have 15 feet buffer between your development and a residential building. From my perspective, it would be better if it said from a residential building that is not within the village center district.
Yeah.
Because some building in the village center district that we're demanding 15 feet buffer from could itself become a multi-use building. It makes sense to me if you're in the periphery of the village center district and you want to give a buffer to somebody in a residential district. It doesn't make sense to require a buffer for a residential building in the village center district.
Right.
There's no logic to it.
Well, what that means, and I think we've heard this from various people over the course of all these projects coming in the village center, is that if you're in the village center, you don't have those buffers. It's district to district that usually gets you into. But I would look at some of the edges, like along Iroquois Avenue there, down at the sort of bottom leftish, where the village center stops, and there's just a whole string of little tiny lots that are right there. Well, the first one, there's no way. I mean, that sort of buffer that's trying to happen there is pretty tough to do anything about. That's not an existing condition. And right along School Street, one side of School Street is village center and the other side isn't, so it's a little tricky where those boundaries and the seams in between those districts happen. So I don't know what you're really trying to say, but if you're in the village center, you don't get those protections. I don't think you can have them. Because you have an older residential use that happens to be right next to some other lot that turns over, and all of a sudden I want to build a new senior housing building. I get to do that.
Yeah, so has there been any thought about adjusting the village center boundary?
I don't know that we've thought about that. I think what we're really trying to do is to say there are other parts of, those major arteries coming in and out of the village center, like Pearl Street, that we feel like we should have a little more control over. And
I think all the trunk roads coming into the village center, and the ones that are probably going to be affected most, are Park and Pearl at the moment.
And
Okay.
It'd be nice to have a design review overlay
Okay.
for every property that's contiguous with the village right of way.
On Pearl.
Regina, what's going on is that you've got a lot of people who own the old Victorians. If they haven't been converted already into apartments, they are still single-family homes, and they enjoy their single-family home, and they don't want to see anything happen to them at the moment. Unfortunately, the people in the village center district have seen development like they have never seen before, and they're having a little bit of development shock right now. And the fact that development has occurred for like 5 straight years is really put them into a little bit of shock. And I don't understand that. If you had some construction on your front of your street for 5 years, I can see how it might be a little sensitive. So, but when it comes to, yes, the trunk rolls, I mean, we obviously have Lincoln Street that goes out, and it's already got its own little tail that we can't see here on the map. That continues out with the multifamily mixed use. But when it comes to some of the Victorians, which are of course on Pearl Street, and some of them have been converted, some of them haven't. So you've got some already pre-existing conditions of commercial development on corners, especially. But some of it is of course, the corners can be short, corners in between corners can be long in there. There is no, it's not all a standard block. So there is no standardization in that area. In fact, when we had a development for a, I think it was fourplex that was behind the shopping center there on was it School Street? No. And it's a side street off of South Summit. That actually didn't make any sense because it's residential, but it's in a commercial area. And so by definition, they had to conform to all of the have to haves when you put in something that's next to a residential building, which of course was across the fence. So there's some pieces in there, and it's how to reflect on that issue, which is what we are coming up against and probably will as the development pressure to commercialize a lot of what's currently there, because some people will have to make ends meet, and I could see that development pressure happening. So it's how do we approach that and have some thought toward that, because I can see it coming.
Phil, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I remember from a couple work sessions ago, I think some of the talk of expanding the village center was specifically about incorporating that design review aspect of that we have in the village center. And I'm wondering if, you know, instead of expanding the village center, do we add design review to, say, the residential office zones that allow us to, you know, create different, as we're talking about the village center and creating those kind of suggestions to the designers that we then can create suggestions for these buffer zones as we're talking about with different requirements or different suggestions.
If I remember right, the residential office zones, you can't, the building still has to look residential. So it's not design review as such, but you can't make a building and make it look like an office rather than residence.
Yeah, personally, I think that the link there, which is residential office between the village center and the transit-oriented district, is fairly, for the moment, it's fairly safe in that it's a pretty well-defined little section with a fair consistency of building types. But then you get to the transit-oriented district, which, you know, is a major part of our community. It's kind of always been a little bit different, you know, sort of strip malls and fast food and so forth. But the buildings that are coming in there, you know, you get some nice ones that kind of make everybody feel good, like the new entrance to the fairgrounds, which you know, is just a delightful little structure. It's barely there, but it's very nice. And then you get the new building that's, you know, Nick was talking about before, that is a little bit different than what we saw when it came to the Planning Commission as the small part of a big hotel project. And now that's the only thing that's there. And it just, people are kind of wondering, well, what happened there? How did that, you know, why is that the way it is? We don't quite get that. So I think we want to be just a little bit more intentional about the kind of things that come in there. And maybe, you know, if we have a chance to really make them, you know, hit a higher bar, that would be a good thing. Okay. And I would say that maybe a little part of Maple that well, I guess we're already village center until you get almost up to Elm Street, and then it's pretty residential. That's probably fine, but we may want to allow, you know, residential office type designation for some of that street, because, you know, you've already got a handful of businesses down there that have moved into the old Victorian. So there's some things to think about, but I kind of like the overlay, you know, the design review overlay approach a little bit more than just flat out changing their districts.
Yeah, and that's a bear of a thing to do, so it's best to avoid it if it's not needed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, on we go.
On we go. What else do I have here? This was just another section of the comprehensive plan I think basically we've kind of talked about this already too. So this is really what we were just talking about. So that looks good. So that's the end for me. I'm gonna stop sharing this. How do I do that? Hold on, I have to go. Did it work?
Yep.
Awesome.
So do we want to get into the nitty gritty of some, I talked about changing the land development code in relation to contiguous buildings within the village center district. I just think that makes sense, especially if you've got a small lot in the village center district and we're saying, give us 10 foot of your frontage. And by the way, you can't build in the last 15 feet. It's like, well, okay, then it's a vacant lot. Also, what components of do we just want to say the design review components for the village center district shall be also the same design standards for the overlay districts and the trunk roads coming in? Do we want to emphasize the fact that Park and Pearl are the two that are probably going to get see the most changes? I mean, there's that really nice section on Pearl till you get to the top of the hill. Then you've got the two shopping center districts. Then you've got CVE, and you're moving out to West Street Extension. That feels very different from coming down the hill when you're coming west after you pass Post Office Square. From there on coming down, it's still the older buildings. Your construction's a new building, but it's still the older buildings with their particular look. Do we want to have the same overlay from the Five Corners right up to West Street Extension, or do we want to look at it a little bit differently in that short section? Park Street, there's not a lot left there once the Chittenden Crossing development moves forward. There's the building in front of the Park Street School. New people looking at who were going to be new owners asked if it could be 4 stories. My answer was the Land Development Code permits 4 stories. I also told them I liked the building that had been proposed. I believe they did talk to the architect who designed it to see if he could put another story on top without impacting negatively the way it looked, because I thought it just looked great. But now's our opportunity before anybody comes in for any more applications on those streets to sort of put a marker down and say, this is what we're looking for all properties that are contiguous with the village right-of-way on these trunk roads. I'm not sure there's more pressure, Main Street, past the village center district. There's not a lot of opportunity for anything to happen there. Nor on Maple, past the village center district. I mean, the village center district goes basically to the pizza place on Park, and it goes to School Street on Pearl. So it's after that in those roads. We're going to do it goes to Central Street as well, and we also put a line around McClure's Moving and Storage to pull it into the village center district.
Diane?
Okay, so I think since the trunk roads literally are our gateways, and we've not necessarily done our best at making sure that it's all multifamily homes coming in, and that's literally what people see when they first approach. Now, I do recognize that the historical context of literally the development that I live in was literally a farm, and it literally was on the outskirts of, next to the fairgrounds, was literally out in the boonies between Burlington and Essex Junction. At the time that this was put in, I'm not in the boonies anymore, and so things have changed, and I think the village needs to be reflective of that change, that we just can't throw something up on these trunk roads and allow, okay, whatever seems to be fitting, just because it meets the minimal code requirements right now, we have to allow it. I think we need to change that, because these are our doors. They're the doorways coming in to the village. That, you know, historical context as it is, yeah, I recognize, but I think we can overcome the fact that we're no longer in the boonies at each of the five roads. So the number of comments, and I have not gone out of my way to hear the comments about the building on Pearl Street with the green siding right now. And yes, I had a lovely discussion with the contractor who told me that it's eventually going to be painted, which would be interesting. But because I asked him if it was going to be stucco, and he said no, it was going to be painted. Okay, that's different. But in anticipation of what's going on with the rest of the lot, yeah, I'd like to know what's going on with the rest of the lot. Okay, as to how are things going to be planned out? I mean, the post office square seems to be thought out as to what's going on there, and they seem to keep it tidy and neat for the most part. I noticed that the other shopping center across the way did a lot of renovations with Planet Fitness. You know, it's what, I guess it's what do we want to see as to what's going on here? Because even the renovations piece is, I kind of kind of reflect on Stowe, which I think has a design review in the entire town. We aren't there, but on the other hand, it does kind of make some conformity as to their signs, as to what the expectations are going to be. Now it's, of course, my dear husband, okay, he says, you know, there's another 4-story building going up, okay. And it's like, yes, dear, here's the plan. Would you like to look at it? So I, you know, it's, I have to justify a lot of things, not just to the general public. So I'm sure some of us who share things with our spouses may have to do the same thing. But I think I'd like to see this be the village that we expect. And the only way we're going to get that is not to just allow anything to go up, but to actually have some guidance. It may not be as strict as the downtown, okay, but I'm thinking we need to have some guidance going forward. And now is probably the time to think about that.
Stephen's got something to say. I just want to say one thing first, Steve, if I can, and that is that I want to also remind people about the Railroad and Main building, which we did have review of, and we did think about it, and it's still not quite what we were led to believe it would be, and it breaks a couple of other key rules that might need to be in place after seeing that, which basically is that, you know, its front to the street is not active. You know, the windows it just doesn't really present. You can never tell if it's open or busy, or, you know, unless there's someone on the porch. And it doesn't really have that engagement with the street that we would normally expect something like that to have. So just because we have design review doesn't necessarily make the thing perfect, but you know, it gives us some targets and some examples of things that we need to keep thinking about as we work on this.
Yeah, and that story's not finished yet, John.
I know it's not finished, but it's been there for 2 years now, and you know, we got to keep thinking it's not finished yet. I mean, it's kind of a struggle for people.
Yes.
Stephen.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like I would like to have us to have a little bit more control about how things look, especially coming in into the village center. The thing that matters most to me, and I don't know how we mandate this or regulate it, and maybe it's not possible, so I defer to the architects and others, but how do we prevent, I'm less concerned with exactly what a building looks like than that it looks cheap. And I don't know how you prevent buildings that look cheap. You know, they can have all the right elements and all the right, you know, massing and the right windows, but if you get someone in there who just wants to slap it up and move on, you end up with really cheap looking buildings that don't age well, and they look cheap, you know. And I don't know how we get around that, but if we can find a way, I think we should explore it. And that's my 2 cents.
Anyone else with a comment on this one?
Well, I think, you know, that just doesn't go to design, it also goes to materials. I'm not sure if we want to start mandating that. It's something we can certainly take a look at. But, you know, there's always that balancing act between, do we want affordable housing, or do we want a housing that's, you know, mid-range, and that's the trade-offs you have all the time. I don't disagree with anything you said, Steve. How do we get there without either making it too expensive to develop or get to a point where a lot of people already in our community can't afford to live here? But it's a point well taken. I agree 100%. Just have to find some way to get there.
I just want to say affordable housing doesn't have to look cheap. It can do what Stephen's saying. It is expensive.
Well, maybe I used the wrong term.
But
yeah, I used the wrong term. Have you tried to buy any cedar siding recently?
No, I know it's expensive, but I just want to reiterate that to Stephen's point, and I also agree with what Diane was saying about the trunk roads and having some design review to make sure that things that are going up match what the vision is. It makes sense to have some design review over those. But I agree with Stephen that, you know, it's if there's a way to make things not look cheap, and that doesn't mean that we're then saying no to affordable housing in the village center. It just means we don't want the building to look cheap. Those are two different things. That's all.
Well, there's a phrase that I heard one of my fellow architects use recently, which is that good design doesn't have to be expensive, and bad design isn't always cheap. You know, so there's some aspects to design that can be recognized and implemented that might be able to get us somewhere, but you know, it's tough. It's a hard thing to regulate, and so some of the where you have more development pressure, which I would say is as you get closer to 5 corners, but that definition could change. Could be where you get closer to 5 corners or one of the major arteries feeding 5 corners. You know, somehow you have to be able to balance that design in intensity, that design pressure with the ability to raise the bar. Because if you don't have the pressure and you raise the bar, you won't get anybody to build anything. So we know that there's pressure out there right now, and we are trying to use that pressure to allow us to have a little more control, which is a good thing. Phil's got the hand up, and then Diane, and if you have a response, go ahead.
Yeah, I think with the trunk roads, I think it's important to think about, you know, what's going to make someone want to park further up the trunk roads and walk into the village center. This was brought up in one of our last meetings about parking and how people expect to just like park right in front of the store that they're going to. And I think we want to create an environment that attracts people to park maybe a little further away and walk around downtown. And so I think having some sort of review on those buildings down the trunk roads would definitely help with that. And, you know, I think most people right now are just driving into the center and parking anywhere they can. I don't think there's a real desire to walk down unless you live down one of the trunk roads. So I think keeping that in mind as well, and what's going to make people want to park up there and walk in.
Thanks. Diane?
Well, I will say that I try to leave my car at home, and I take my bicycle or I walk. And I live a good mile from Five Corners. So, but I'm finding that I'm unusual. So, I guess my concern is that there are buildings that I understand have turned over in hands, and that some of the buildings on Pearl Street could eventually be consolidated with their neighbor, making a much larger lot. And I think now is the time to talk about what do we want to see. And the other quick comment I have is in the last time, have we had anybody take us up on the offer to do something special to provide affordable housing? We have some incentives, but I haven't seen anybody take us up on it. So obviously the incentives are working. I was at Regina's housing meeting, which was was Monday? Gosh, time flies.
Monday.
Yeah.
Monday. And so, the discussion with the crew there is, I guess I could say, I heard some frustration. I expressed some frustration, but it's now, what can we do as a county to provide for affordable housing? It isn't just us, it's everybody. But on the other hand, if that's our goal, then we really need to step up. And as John said, there's good design and there's poor design, and it doesn't, and it's flexible as to how much it costs to do. So I think we can get a bunch of people who are into design, maybe challenge them a little bit. Everybody loves a challenge sometimes, and they can surprise us, true. But I think we need to guide them that that's what we're looking for. And I think the Land Development Code and eventually the village plan will address both of those. But at this point, since we're at the plan, I think we need to lead, with the plan, because that's where we're at right now.
The code, you mean, not the plan?
Yes, we have to lead with the code. I think we've talked about the plan, and you've heard pieces of our talking about the plan, Regina, and it's, in fact, we've talked at it, for the last 2 years as to what do we, knowing that this was coming at some point, what do we want to see? So, which is do we want to expand the design review area? And so we're only going to accomplish that with the code. And perhaps we need, at this point, need the code to lead the plan.
Well, I've worked in places that have requirements for affordable housing, and I've worked in places that have incentives, and we're currently on the incentive side. We don't have any requirements. It's kind of it's a lofty goal, and it's actually pretty expensive to build a housing unit and know you're going to lose money on it. It changes the dynamics of how you have to make a project. How do you create the project so the development is reasonable and works, and it's tricky, so we could have a requirement and then give people incentives fulfill that somehow, or to give them, certain breaks to fulfill that. But, even in Burlington, where that has been in place for quite a while, it's hard to get some of these projects together, and it doesn't actually lower except for the housing units that were made to be affordable, it doesn't make the rest of them any less expensive. It actually makes them more expensive. So it's kind of a tricky one. I don't really know how to come down on that one, but what I'll say is that Essex Junction has the luxury right now of several developers who have shown an amazing ability to create affordable housing. It's still market rate housing, but it's way below some of the other housing prices that are customarily seen in the marketplace. And maybe down, maybe the Five Corners, the Village Center area isn't the place for that to happen. It just can't be. It's too high. The density issues and what we're asking people to meet there is too high. But the rest of the village could provide locations where you can get less expensive housing all by itself at the market rate. And I think, we've seen that going in from some of our developers, and it comes in day after day after day at a much lower rate than some of the other housing opportunities. So I'm the way that we can put the accessory apartments in, saying, relaxing the rules for accessory apartments, providing more creative ways to allow people to have housing units on their property, all helps. Every last one of those housing units helps. So let's see what we can do. But it's a pretty big step towards, going from incentives to requirements.
Yeah, John had mentioned something before. I don't think people looked at it, and I did a quick broad search. And in New Orleans, they changed the requirements for affordable housing. They didn't require it in new build because they'd talked to developers and done the research and said new build was quite expensive. They encouraged it in existing buildings, and they found that had good return. Might be something to look at. I don't know if it's good for here, but sorry?
Do you know if there were tax credits or historic tax credits involved in that?
No, I didn't go into that much depth, but they actually picked, I think they also picked areas of the city, that had older buildings that they thought were appropriate, that found that even when they give incentives for new build, nobody wanted to take it. But when they started looking at the older buildings, the foundation's already there, the utilities already connected. It seemed to be a spot where people who were renovating them could make it work.
Regina, in the Chittenden County information, what was do you know if they had the average cost of developing or building a new 1-bedroom or a new 2-bedroom apartment is?
The last time we looked at that, which is a little old, pre-COVID lumber materials pricing, you can't build anything for less than $300,000 for the most part.
So just think about that, you guys, because that's an amazing number. To say that even the best minds and all of the things that we're trying to build out there in multifamily housing and how can we do it? They can't build anything for less than $300,000. So where in the world are we going to incentivize anybody to build affordable housing where somebody normal could pay for that? That's just an outrageous number. But that's why this is so hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, people who work in the affordable housing arena and work with Campbell Union Housing Vermont, I happen to know because I worked for the Vermont Housing Partnership for 3 years. They get a 20 to 25% developer fee right off the top. No other developer gets that sort of fee right off the top. And there's a lot of tax credits and so on that, based on a lot of the good work that Andy Broderick did before he left, they have access to. Normal developers don't have access to that sort of stuff. So maybe we should be bringing in the affordable housing guys and working with developers and say, look, this is a site, you affordable housing guys build it because you're the ones with the tax credits, the experience, and the know-how and heart to get it built.
Yeah, it's a little strange. Their numbers, and I'm thinking my numbers are even 4 or 5 years old, but they will come out and tell you that their cost to build a unit at the time, it was like $230,000. So whatever they're doing, it isn't because they can make the buildings cheap, less expensive. It's still costing them the same amount of money to develop a unit. Mm-hmm. And that's my point is it's a staggering amount of money to say that in order to go through the whole process and build a unit of housing, it costs that much. That somehow we got to fix that. And I'll tell you that some of our local developers are not going to, they're not paying that much for a unit. So I think we've got some people in the community already that have been doing a good job of doing this. And, to incentivize, we're still going back to whether we incentivize or whether we require. And if you require it, somebody's losing money. And so it's really more of a, on a particular unit, then the other ones will have to cost more. So,
can I ask, though, losing money on what respect? I mean, the whole building, like if you build 30 units of housing, you don't have to have 30 affordable units at an affordable rental rate. And right. What we're talking about in terms of affordability, it's the rental rate. It's not right, but they're still making well over, the market value probably on those other 28 units. So
you need to convince them that it's still worth their while to build the whole project, and that's where the tricky part comes in, because we're saying if you want to do it, then you're going to have to give up this stuff. And if it still works for them, I mean, many of the developers like Housing Vermont and those types of people, their whole goal is to provide, as much housing and as much affordable housing as they can. But
and they're built almost entirely with public dollars. Like there's very little private investment in a lot of those affordable housing.
I think it might be an avenue we should look at about talking to these developers about going to Housing Vermont or Champlain Housing Trust and working with them. Yeah, I think that would be a way to take a risk away from the property owner and at the same time get us what we're looking for.
I think so. I think that's part of what the housing committee is also supposed to be trying to do for us as well, as trying to provide some of those. I'd be curious to know, as you guys have been speaking, these incentives that have been put out there that aren't working. Should we look to maybe try and change some of those incentives? What are those incentives?
We could try to strengthen those. That's certainly an option.
I don't know what they are because I didn't see them. Is it just a density bonus essentially?
Density bonus. The same sort of bonus is really for there's a bonus if you do solar. There's a few bonuses there. I will say, and I'm sort of digressing, but Irish mind. One of the buildings that's being built at Chittenden Crossing is going to be 100% affordable.
Great. So all the rents will be at that affordable.
What does that mean, 100% affordable? Because the definition of affordable is usually based on some percentage, like 70% or 80% of the mean income, which has no relationship to how much it costs to build it.
Right.
So what you say, Robin, is 80%. The rents are equivalent to what you make at 80% median income. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's general. That was changes all the time. But it's more. Colin says every property is affordable to somebody. It just depends on how much you earn. But well, I don't have all the details yet. I have been told that it's the building in the back behind where the swimming pool is shown on the plan, if anybody can remember, and that's going to be affordable housing. I didn't want us to wait until the last building came in front of the Planning Commission. I wanted to know we had the affordable housing before it was built out. So the next one's going to be affordable housing.
And is somebody managing that building for them, or they're just keeping it?
It's very, very early days. Very early days. The owners of the property are bringing affordable housing developer in to do the project.
Okay.
So they won't actually.
Yeah, so the majority of the time, that's really how it works. If you're talking about a significant number of units, you get the nonprofit housing developers at the table. The The other types of regulatory tools, inclusionary zoning being the main one, is one of many tools you can put in your toolbox, but it's going to produce a very small amount of units in the grand scheme of things. And it's just because it's very difficult on the private sector side of things who don't have access to public dollars to really make that work. And so in order to make those programs work, at best you're requiring them to do 10%, and typically you're giving them a lot in return, which could be totally fine in terms of the grand scheme of things for housing. So they get a very big bonus density for that. But that's my understanding, is that the housing committee, they are over there working away, thinking through all of these different options that make sense for both you folks and Essex, and then we can work with whatever they bring forward.
Right.
Bill?
Are there other types of bonuses that are available, like that we could put in? Are there like lot coverage bonuses, parking bonuses, other things like that? Because obviously, the more units a developer can put in, the more they'll make off of them, which means the more they can do affordable, right? Because
Yeah, village center.
essentially that's how the economics work.
Village center would be difficult. We're already, they've got full lot coverage. They're only allowed 4 stories. It used to be they could have 6 with a waiver. The trustees took that out. So there's not a lot of flexibility in the village center district. More flexibility elsewhere.
Yeah, but the strategy is fine. So in many cases, those are the options, and we've done projects where you got a whole nother story. Go another story. If you meet the requirements for the incentives, you can go another story. You can increase the density, and not by a small amount. I mean, Regina's right. I mean, the density bonus is significant. You might be able to go from 30 units to 45 units or something. It really helps. Your lot coverage can go up. Those are all in play. So yeah, good.
Yeah, and it does, the density bonuses, well, to answer your question, Patrick, traditionally density bonuses are just not that helpful. We all have them in our zoning regulations, like these feel good things, like, oh, we want more energy efficiency, we want parks to be given to the village, we want this, we want that, we want this. Partially they don't work because everybody puts in a laundry list of like 12 different things that they want. And so you really have to be much more tight and specific about what you want. But also what you're asking for in terms of what you're giving the developer for it is usually not matched up correctly. So you definitely can tweak those programs to try to get them closer to actually making it an option that a developer would even consider doing. But typically, you're asking for way more affordable housing for what the developer is actually going to get in return. So they typically can't make that pro forma work at the end of the day by using that incentive-based system.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd be interested to hear what people would think of in terms of requirements. I mean, as you guys have probably all seen, I'm a huge advocate for affordable housing, and if out of 30 units, if somebody's building 2, I mean, I just think there's a disconnect out of what that potential developer might be trying to do, which is maximize their dollar, and what we're trying to do, which is make a very diverse community, both in ethnicity and also incomes and housing styles and housing types. And it's not just efficiencies, but it's 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms that are available to anybody in the economic scale. And that's what I think we need to be promoting, is that diversity of all those things, and not just allowing somebody to come in and say, hey, I can't do 2, 3 apartments out of 45 because I'm not maximizing my profit there. I guess that's where I'm looking at it from.
Yeah, for sure. And that's always the balance and the understanding of that and where it's coming from. And I've listened to Eric Hoekstra many and many and many a times to try to understand really where the breakdown is and why it doesn't work. And I think, if I can summarize him, but don't quote me, it really just comes down to the fact that they could invest money in a way easier way without risk, and there are 1,000 other things that they would do with the money than build housing. Is if I could sort of summarize where the world is on the private sector side of things. And that's not to say that, from a government perspective, we shouldn't be pushing the envelope for things that we really, truly need in the community for the long term. But I think that's kind of where the rub is. It's by no means to say that they aren't, I don't think it's that they can't make it work. It's just that they could make money so many other ways than housing development when it comes down to it, and they would just certainly do that instead.
I think the answer might be public-private partnerships.
Yeah,
it comes down to us talking to the person who owns the land and wants to develop it and saying, look, we want this. You're telling us you can't afford it. These people can. Let's bring them together and get it. If they're bringing in Champlain Housing Trust of the World, or whatever they're called now, and they're bringing in public money, the picture looks very different.
Yeah, and that, on the one hand, if you put an inclusionary zoning ordinance in place, you kind of force those partnerships to happen if they aren't happening naturally. That's essentially what ends up happening in Burlington is, Cathedral Square, Champlain Housing Trust, all those folks come to the table to do and fulfill the inclusionary zoning unit role for the private developer. And then they maintain and hold those buildings for forever. But it's also a matter of scale. Like CHT, I've spoken to them a number of times, they're not going to take on 2 units in a building out of 30 units. That's just not the way that their system can work either. So it's tricky.
I wanted to say that I agree with Patrick. I'm a big proponent of affordable housing as well. And I think, like, in some ways, if the whole reason is that they just want to spend the money somewhere else, then this is kind of where we have to take the stand and force them to not spend the money somewhere else and say, this is important to our community and we need to have affordable housing going forward. So I think that's something to consider with inclusionary zoning and writing that into the code. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, we talked about it a couple meetings ago, was accessory dwelling units and incentivizing homeowners, single family lots to invest and build accessory dwelling units, and including some sort of affordability there as well as part of that incentive. I think it was at a presentation almost that was almost a year and a half ago. I think Diane and I were there, and they talked about the ability of writing into the code of zoning for accessory dwelling units and allowing for residents to kind of subdivide their own lots in certain ways. And I'd be really interested in figuring out ways to utilize those ADUs.
Yeah, we already have
encouraging
dwelling units in the code, and it can be approved administratively. But I'm glad you brought it up, because one thing I'd like to change at the moment, our code says that the accessory dwelling unit is the only one that can be rented out, that the main house has to be the primary residence of the property owner. I'm thinking about it, and maybe these houses have 3 or 4 bedrooms. The accessory dwelling unit's 1 bedroom. Maybe there's 1 person living in the house, maybe there's 2 people. I'd like to give them the option of flipping that and saying that the property owner can live in the smaller unit, which opens up the larger house to a larger family.
Yeah, I think Burlington has that in their code.
Yeah, they do. It'd be relatively easy to add that to the code, but thank you. I'd thought about it and forgot, but thank you for reminding me.
So state statute just changed, and you have to make that edit.
Great.
So easy breezy.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback real quick on what Phil was just saying and thinking about the affordability aspect of an ADU. I mean, is there anything that we could do in terms of existing rental units, like say there is a 3 or 4 bedroom home that is looking to rehab themselves? I mean, this might be more for the housing committee or something to that effect, but how do we also stimulate the rehab of those units as well? I mean, I also understand too that we're talking about the village center too today, so this might be a conversation to be tabled for a different evening as well. But just wanted that thought ran through my head about.
That's a big conversation if you're talking about changing R1, R2 districts to say that every building in that district can become.
Not every, but to create incentives again.
Push back on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, not every, but to create those incentives for if somebody wanted to create affordable housing out of a rental unit. And again, affordable housing too is oftentimes they are mixed. It's part market rent, part affordable. That's in some ways the only way they can make them bankroll too, and have revenue in order to maintain. So it's not, when I talk about an affordable building, I'm not talking about 100% affordability, because that can also be hard to maintain, and it also isn't best practice for all the residents that live there as well. There should be interactions of all sorts of socioeconomic scales.
Yeah, which is not what's actually happening in a lot of the way it's rolling out when the affordable housing folks are building their, taking on the projects and building them totally in their own building. It's like, it's the hardest nut. So many of these housing pieces are so hard to figure out. It is all a balancing act.
Well, I would like to suggest that we go on record as saying we're all in favor and support affordable housing, and we're looking forward to seeing what the housing committee brings back to us, and try and respond to it that way, because the demand is great, the request is admirable, and everybody supports it. It's just a really tough one. We're not the only community that's struggling with how to make this better. Just the sheer number of housing units that our county is short is one giant problem, and the supply, the amount of money that it takes to build these things is in our area is ridiculous, and we build, I don't know, Regina, maybe you have the figures, but we've been building like 500 to 800 housing units a year in the county, and we need 4,000. So we just never get there.
We averaged 700 between 2016 through 2019. And that was our goal. But our goal was also to do 20% of that as affordable. And we fell short of that goal. I think we actually only got to, I think it works out to be 13% affordable. And I'll just point out that in the 2 years that got us even 13% affordable, 2018 and 2019, is largely because of the housing bond that was passed for the state. And that's really the main thing that's either going to make affordable housing happen in a big way or it's not. It's government dollars.
And passed another bond, or they're trying to pass another bond? Is that, I heard they were trying to, add another large chunk of money to that.
I think with all this federal stimulus money, it's on the table for sure in lots of different ways. So I think it's going to be super, super helpful.
Good.
And definitely, even if your land development code doesn't require affordable housing, courting housing developers when you've got a property that works for them is the way to go. Nonprofits, I mean, to do the affordable housing piece.
Absolutely.
All right. It's getting late. Anybody have more comments, or are we ready to shut down for this meeting and pick it up again next time.
Well, I have a couple of things I want to say, but it's not germane to directly germane to the conversation in a minute. So when you're ready to talk about something else.
All right.
So I could just let you guys know what my strategy is, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So I will do my best to try to actually go in and make some text edits at your next meeting to try to address some of the things that we talked about tonight. I don't think I'm going to be able to get to any of the housing stuff, but we'll attempt to bring some language around the concepts of all the other pieces that we talked about. And then generally the way that it'll work is we'll have a conversation about a particular topic. At the next meeting, I'll bring you draft edits. You give me comments, and at the next meeting, I'll give you the changes based on the comments that we got from the first meeting. Then we'll introduce another topic, and we'll kind of just keep rolling like that. And the topics that I am aware of that we're going to be working on is this downtown design review concept is one sort of bucket. Another bucket is really from the stormwater world and what those folks need to really try to match up better with all of the state permitting. Then we have a bucket of state statute changes since the last time that your LDR was made. I don't think there's a ton of stuff, but the accessory dwelling unit was a good example. And then any other housekeeping things, if folks have had stuff that you just want cleaned up, we will address those. And then we'll kind of do a time check situation. I know you folks were really wanting to get something done in the fall. If the affordable housing folks are not prepared with a recommendation by then, we'll have to just sort of see where we're at. And depending on what their recommendation is, like if they are to recommend an inclusionary zoning ordinance and that's what you folks want to do, it's not easy. So I'll just put that out there to manage expectations in terms of how long of an effort that might take. In South Burlington, we worked on it for probably a year and a half, 2 years. So.
Wow. So we don't have that much time available to us, but we're happy to have the expertise available for those communities that have gone through this already. So I look forward to seeing how that shakes out and maybe the materials that you'll have ready for us next time.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome. And for homework on our end, Diane had put together a long list of things that we wanted to talk about, which I think you have.
Yeah.
And to that we've kind of we'll try and add things as we go along here, but let's see what both of those things look like when we bring them together, and it'll be great. We haven't done this update in a while, so it's going to be helpful, and a lot has happened since we did it last time.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So anything else on this topic, or are we going to let Robin fill us in on other things? Robin, you're on.
Wow. Well, I just want to say thank you, Regina. I mean,
no problem.
Right across the board, CCRPC, we couldn't do half the things we do without them, and I don't think they get enough credit. Every single staff member there. Yeah. So now she's going to go off and tell the truth. No. So a couple of things. Anybody who's on Facebook will know in the last 2 weeks, big changes for the connector road. We signed off with the last property owner. So we have all the roads and easements we need to build the road and do the railway upgrades. That includes every crossing in the 5 corners. Gets a nice, smooth concrete surface between the tracks, so you won't be going bumpity bump and spilling your coffee, Phil, as you drive to work. Also, all the crossings will get gates, which we haven't had before. So that's quite exciting. You may know this, but I'll say it. When the project does go through, at the moment when the train comes through, every light in all the roads in the 5 corners goes red. now, when we finish the project, it'll only be the roads that the trains crossing will have a red light. And of course, the connector road lets everybody going north, south, east, continue going even when the chip train comes through. So that's a good thing. So after that, we couldn't do anything last year because we had right-of-way clear for the railroad work, but not for the road work. So we had to go to VTrans, and they gave us right-of-way clear for the road work as well. So the railway have to go back and rebid. I've asked VTrans for permission to have the railway do that. If that happens, we will get the railway work done this year. We will bid out the road in autumn, and we should start the road as early as possible in spring 2022. So that's good news. Also, you're going to see some work happening in front of the Firebird Cafe in the not too distant future in terms of remediation. We've been negotiating with the people on Chittenden Crossings. There's stockpile soil there that they'll be taking out, because they'll be taking out soil to get at the contaminated soil, which is 12 foot down. And then they'll be putting that soil back in again. So they've agreed to let us do that verbally. We just have to get an agreement with them. Also, I think I bumped into John and asked him about this. I approached the trustees about a month ago about having what I called master classes for village residents. Late summer, early autumn. I talked to the police chief. He's going to give a class to teach people how to take good photographs with their cell phones. I'm going to ask Raj to do the same with SLRs and normal cameras. I approached Jake at the Firebird Cafe. He's going to do a little class and teach people how to make hot sauce. Daryl at Mark Barbecue is going to give barbecue classes to people. Chris Kessler from Black Flannel is going to do a homebrew class. So I've been going about trying to collect people. I'm going to ask, is Nick still here, if the Tree Advisory Committee could give little classes to people about trees and stuff like that. Evan, I asked Evan if his wife could give an art class. So Public Works, Rock and Ron from Public Works is hopefully going to give a couple of classes. He's going to show people how to fix a running tap and how to stop, a running toilet. Little simple things like that, different things. I did it once before the National Museum in Ireland. People really liked it. It's also, I found it's a marketing and promotional thing for businesses, because people come and somebody shows them how to make homebrew beer. They think this is great. They go home, find out they don't know how to do it. Then they go and buy the guy's beer. Same with the barbecue, Daryl at Mark's Barbecue, I just think is a great guy. And be nice for him to get some promotion in that regard. I'm going to go to the seamstress up Pearl Street to see if they'll work with this. See how many people I can get. Maybe the running shoe place will do a running class or something. Evan asked me to do garden design and small space planning for residential buildings. I think John would be much better at the latter. So I'm going to try and mug him to do that. But I think it'd be nice if we could, one, get elected officials and staff to be there to give some, master classes to people. It'd be also nice if we can get some of the planning commission members who have, experience or expertise in a certain field to put their arm up and say, yes, we can do something. The library, Wendy at the library is fantastic. So already said the library will do something. So I'd like you guys to think about that. Think if there's any little master classes you'd like to give, where they're going to happen, how are they going to happen. To be decided. It'd be nice to know we have a group of master class people who would like to do that. That's the hard bit. The easy bit's working out where it's going to happen. Hopefully, late summer, early autumn, we won't have the restrictions they have now, and we can free a lot of space up. Any questions?
Nice work.
It's a fun thing to do. I mean, I did write a memo.
Get back out there and do things together, which should be fairly soon. I think this, and especially with the warmer weather coming, it's going to be great.
Yeah, I did write a memo. I don't think it's made it to the trustees yet. A few months ago, actually, I was with Ricky Jones at Public Works, and he's a sign in his office that said "Smile" here in Essex Junction. I don't see why we couldn't have that in every road in the Essex Junction. Why can't we have signs that say "Smile" here in Essex Junction? It sort of goes along with our new design overlay for the trunk roads. And I think Dan hit the nail on the head. when people are coming into the village, we want them to say, wow, this is a nice place. Let's like go a bit further and stop. I think it all comes down to that. Any questions?
No.
Okay, as you were. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks.
I don't even want to know if there's a question or an answer out there related to merger or not merger. I'm just going to wait to see what happens with the revote. And then what I would like to request, Robin, is that on behalf of staff and the village governing entity, whoever that might be, maybe they can give us some kind of a update after the next vote. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And before I forget, I didn't mean to leave Patrick, Phil, and Steve out of the master classes. I'm sure they've all got exceptional skills they can bring to the table and help their fellow residents. Of course, Andrew is clearly going to be showing people how to do some carpentry tricks. He was busy today. Dave texted me during the meeting and said he was stuck in a client's meeting and he couldn't get out, so he sent his apologies.
All right. Unless anybody has any last words, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Beautiful. All in favor of adjourning for tonight, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? That concludes the meeting tonight. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate every comment. And we will see you. Do we have another meeting scheduled, Rob?
Well, it's first Thursday of every month, and we're going to shoehorn in some others if we don't have applications coming in. There's an application coming through. I'm not sure if it's going to be ready or not, but I'll let you guys know. I'm off to eat some chocolate.
Excellent.
All right. Sounds
Thank
Good
good.
night.
And don't forget to
Thanks.
email me with your masterclass ideas. Much appreciated.
I don't know. These days, all I can do is keep my 10-month-old son alive. That's
There you
about
There you
it.
go. You can
That's a
teach
struggle.
people how to change, as they say in the old country, and nappy.
As a new parent, yeah, how to get some sleep. I wish I could figure it out.
Well, it's funny, when I first heard that Stevie Wonder song, and he was singing about a nappy-headed boy, I was going, why would you put a nappy on your son's head? Didn't make any sense to me.
Keep the sun off him, right? I mean, protect him somehow.
Then I realized it was actually called a diaper in America. I had no idea. It'd be a bit stinky.
Nappies.
Nappy.
All right. Night,
All right.
everybody.
Good
Have
night.
fun.